Dave, and let you kick off.
Yeah, and you guys are good little start to kicking this off. You guys are exactly right about how to add value. If you are a numbers person, so much of what you do is important. So thanks everybody for joining us today. We're joined by Jason Knight of Connect Strat and Pinnacle Guide, Jason Tankersley of TF Investors, and then Lamar Matthews of Contigo Strategies. And just like we were diving into early on, today we're going to discuss how to create and improve the operations of your business. From an exit advisor's perspective, we're a specialty M&A firm that targets the lower middle market. But that's not just what we do. I've said it many times, we're not just working towards completing a deal or closing a transaction. A big part of that's what we do, and that's what we're very good at. But a lot of the value add work that needs to be done needs to be completed ahead of time. And that's why we work with businesses well in advance of them wanting to sell. And more particularly, that's why we partner with experts like Jason, Jay, and Lamar to work on the business rather than in it, so that we can identify issues, inefficiencies, remediate them, and ultimately improve the operations of the business and the value of the business. So we're gonna kick things off and let Jason kind of drive things. But if you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom. We'll have some time at the end to answer anything that you want to discuss. You can use the hand raise feature, and we'll make sure to tag you for something at the end. So Jason, you want to get started?
Yeah, appreciate that introduction, and it's always great to be on these calls. I really love working with small, medium-sized businesses. So this is always something I really enjoy doing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, my background, what I do, why I do it, and then I'm going to get into a brief discussion on business operating systems and how to bring value to your business. I'm going to hand off to Lamar, and Lamar is really operationally engaged with a lot of companies that I work with and others in that same market space. And then of course, we'll hand off then to Jay, who can talk about TF Investors and some of the alignment there as well. So appreciate the time. So my background, again, my name is Jason Knight. Anapto is actually my company. I'm a Connect Strat strategic coach and Pinnacle Guide. I've worked as an EOS certified implementer in the past. And I'll explain some of the business operating system engagement that I've got. But I started life probably 3 decades ago as an entrepreneur. I've built a number of companies and grown them and sold them, learned a lot of lessons along the way. My last company was started in 2005, grew it to 50 million was our exit point. In 2014, sold that into a roll-up, and we were the largest of the roll-up. So we took over and ran we're the driver in that roll up, and grew that to about 100 million and 280 people. So wide spectrum of experience in different markets and different sizes and growth trajectory. All right, and learned a lot of lessons in doing that. So we grew both organically as well as through acquisitions, and in doing that, we learned a lot of lessons as to why you needed an operating system. So as with any company, most of my initial startups were run through brute force and heroic efforts, just like everybody else, right? We worked really hard. We were winging it. Blood, sweat, and tears got it to where it was starting to grow. But especially when we started to acquire companies, we recognized that things could come off the rails pretty quickly. We didn't have consistency in our vision, our culture, our operational alignment. And so we were working against ourselves in a lot of cases. And so we actually used a couple of different operating systems. We used scaling up, and we used EOS. In fact, we used an EOS implementer, Mark Winters out of Dallas, to help get us going in that respect. And then we used StratOps, which is an element that brings in strategy on top of some of the business operating systems. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But that kind of got my feet wet as to the need for structure and intentionality in running your business in a way that I had never thought of it in the past. So after selling the company, I retired for a couple of years and recognized that a lot of the lessons I learned were starting to fade a bit. And so as people were coming to me for coaching and guidance, I started to more engage and got back into coaching. So now that's what I do full time. My target client is a little broader than Exit Advisors. It's 2 million to 50 million, and it just depends on the industry and where they're at in their journey. But that's typically who I work with. So all that said, there's three main things that I focus on initially with my clients. I want to make sure it's understood before we even start our journey. So these are pretty obvious, but they're not always well followed. So the first, I always drive home that we take responsibility. If you're going to grow your business and you really are going to be intentional about getting serious about driving value in your company, the first thing is you take responsibility. The good news is if something's going well, you can pat yourself on your back. The bad news is if it's not going well, it's your fault. And not in a negative derogatory way, but it is ours to fix, right? So the leadership team needs to step up. So it's because we didn't make something simple enough, we didn't communicate it well enough, didn't say it often enough, we just picked the wrong person for the job. So making sure that we're really clear on what it means to be a leader, what it means to have a leadership team, and being intentional about driving our business. The second is making sure you're unified as a team. We don't have dissension in the ranks. We make a decision. Everybody in that leadership team acts as though it was their idea to begin with. So really driving home the idea that if you're going to drive value, you're going to grow the company, there's got to be unity at that leadership team. That's something that takes intentionality also. And the last is really just a simple formula. It's actually very simple, but can be tough to do. Most people do not do this, but obsessing, maybe even slightly in an unhealthy way, right? Because we're all growing businesses, but obsessing over the right things, right? The right people, a clear purpose, the right strategy, a strong playbook, a performing team, which is going to get us to our ultimate goals. So as we go into any engagement, I want to make sure with my clients that we're really clear that this is what we're driving. We're driving ownership, responsibility, accountability. We're driving unity, and we're driving obsessing over the right things. All right, so next slide. So how do we do that? We do that with operating systems. You see that, yeah, I'm sure you've all heard of many of these, right? Rockefeller Habits Scaling Up, EOS, Stratop, Pinnacle, 3HAG. There's so many out there that that are great, and frankly, many of which draw from the same source code. If you read Traction from Gino Wickman, he did a great job of simplifying and building a prescriptive approach to a lot of what's in Scaling Up, which is a more complex, expanded version of Rockefeller Habits. They all kind of draw from these same principles, and frankly, they all work well. The idea is that you're intentional about looking at what's going on in your business. You're intentional about making sure that you're doing the right things. You've got the right team. You're holding yourself accountable. So in that, you can really break it down into an operating system includes people and your purpose, your playbook, and your performance. And so I'm going to talk about each one of those. So next slide there. So people, you've all heard right person, right seat. That's an obvious thing that has to get done. We talk about people all the time. People are, frankly, the number one sore spot in every business I deal with. Rarely do I go into a business and someone says, "Oh, our product is just terrible." Right? It's not that. It's I can't get people, and I'm sure you all know where I'm coming from. Especially right now, it is the biggest challenge. If I get people, how do I know if I've got the right people? And so the right seat part of the right person, right seat algorithm isn't that complicated. It's making sure that we understand functionally who owns what aspect of the business, their names on it, we hold them accountable to it. The right person side can be tough. And this is where I came up with this 3 C's assessment and talking points to make sure that we are clear on our team and what it means to have the right person in the organization. So it really boils down to 3 pieces, right? Culture, competence, and commitment. Culture in the sense that, do they meet our core values, or do they meet the functional behaviors of the culture of the business? Are they doing the things that we need them to do? Do they reflect us as an organization? Patrick Lencioni call out here: humble, hungry, smart. Are they humble? Are they hungry? Are they smart? Are they a good team player? And do they work well with the rest of the organization? Do they hold others accountable and hold themselves accountable? So are they a good cultural fit? And frankly, even without a clear definition of what your culture is, more often than not, someone can give me an idea if someone is a culture fit or not. They'll tell me, not only that, but they'll tell me, are they, from a scale from 1 to 10, this guy's a 7. They may not know why, but gut says they're a 7. And so we work to quantify that more clearly, so you know what it means to be a good fit in your organization. The second is competence, making sure that they are genuinely good at their job, right? So are they achieving the results with their role and their areas of accountability? And by the way, you have to know what that role is, and you have to be able to measure it to know if they're effective in that. So those are important elements of a business operating system. The third is commitment. And this is not typically in a business operating system, but it's something that is so important. If you think of your team in 3 layers, the top layer are those people that are the first responders. They're the people that run into the fire. They're always asking, what do you need me to do? Or how can I help, right? So those are the people you want to make your company up of those as much as possible. They're top level commitment. The bottom layer are those that are asking, what's in it for me, right? So they're not putting the team, the company, the client before themselves. They're always asking, what do I get out of this? And frankly, those that are constantly asking what I get out of it, I find are the ones that you least want to give something to. It's the ones that aren't asking, that are running into the fire, that are saying, how can I help? That you want to do everything you can to keep them. So we want to make sure we quantify that. We recognize that, we measure it, and we reward that as much as possible. So when we can, we want to make sure we make up a company full of people that are a good culture fit, that are competent in their job, and they're fully committed to the mission that we have in front of us. And by the way, that commitment will mean the difference between you being mission oriented or maintenance oriented, right? So it is a big difference in the organization. All right, so the next is purpose. So strategy, vision, plan, your brand message, codified culture. We start talking about the strategy. It is a deep subject for sure. So it basically boils down to what needs for which customers do we want to serve uniquely well. That is really what a strategy is. And so if you haven't gone through that exercise of understanding what differentiates you from your competition, it is something you really need to consider going through. And again, some of the business operating systems are a little vague in this area, and that's something we really I focus on heavily with my clients. It's not enough just to be operationally excellent, because many of your competitors are as well. But we've got to have true differentiators. We want to understand what those are. Again, who do we serve? What problems are we solving? And how do we do that in a unique way? All right. The third is the playbook. So a playbook is just like it sounds. So you think about any football team, they've got a detailed playbook that, by the way, they would never give to anybody else. It's proprietary. They know what their plays are. They know who owns what function in that play. They practice it on a regular basis. They're consistently looking at it, measuring and improving it, and they know what their priorities are. And so it's no different in business. We really want to struggle to find the right system for your business. So systemizing your business means we're consistent in the way we do what we do. We are measuring and we're consistently practicing and refining that. Everybody in the organization knows how to do it. They're trained well, and it's something that we are measuring and prioritizing. So in the end, with your core processes, if you're not sure if you really have a great, strong playbook, go pick a group of people in your business that do the same job and ask them what they do. If you've got multiple answers, you've got a problem, right? Ideally, we want one answer. We want to have clarity on what we do, and everyone knows how to do it. All right, and then performance. Performance is something that many of you probably do measure KPIs or OKRs or a scoreboard or scorecard. There's all these different names for it. But in the end, we want to make sure that we're measuring our business in a meaningful way. And when we measure it, we want to make sure that we are clear, not just in perceiving the numbers, but we are comprehending what we're looking at, and we have a prediction that comes out of that. So we're clear as to what we're measuring. We understand what this means to us in our business, and we have an understanding of what's going to happen as a result of those numbers. So we see the trends, we see through the data, the story behind the numbers as to what's about to happen. So we want to consistently make sure that we know that we're measuring and that we understand what winning looks like. Something that we always talk about is if you go down to a playground and you see a bunch of kids playing on a basketball court, if they're playing a game and if they're keeping score, right? If they're not playing a game, they're just tossing balls around, they're goofing off. But if they're playing a game, they're intense, they're yelling at each other, they are organized, and they are looking to score a goal. And it is no different than business. We want to make sure that we know what we're measuring, we know what a goal looks like, and we know when we're winning. And so measuring the performance of the business, not just for the sake of performance measuring, but for the sake of knowing we're tracking towards our ultimate goals and we're winning. So that's just a real high level. I mean, again, if you back up to what a business operating system is, it really boils down to people, purpose, playbook, and performance. And each of the operating systems I mentioned before, and many of the other ones out there, will do that. But pick an operating system, be intentional about your business, get a coach or a facilitator to come in and help you in those areas, develop that system of your business and execute against it. The value that comes out of your business is so great in doing this because you're repeatable, you're scalable, you don't struggle as much with personnel because frankly, you've documented, you've structured your business so that no one piece is ultimately a hinge pin in the business. And it's going to give you a chance at some point, if you did want to exit, to be much higher value and be sellable and not have the business be dependent on you as the major driver in the organization. So that's a real simple overview. Lamar, I know you've got a lot to add from an operational standpoint on how to actually do this and what it looks like from the team standpoint.
Hey, thanks, Jason. Jason has done a really good job of doing a good overview of an operational system. My background is similar to his, serial entrepreneur. I've sold a number of businesses. And what I learned in that process, again, by making mistakes, is how important it is to have an operational system in place that you follow. And one of the biggest pieces that I want to focus on today is that, as you may all know, fast-growing, strong, successful companies have two very important people at the top. Next slide. Next slide, please. First is the visionary, the face of the company, who clearly sees the vision for the company and articulates it, and is more outwardly facing. Next slide. Second is the inside the company focused individual. In the different operating systems that we're talking about, it could be called, in EOS, it's the integrator. It could be the president, it could be the COO. Sometimes it's even the CEO, but it's the person who is executing the vision. So you need both of these people to make the system work. Next slide, please. Most companies start out with the visionary who had the idea for the business doing both roles. And they can get their company to a certain level, but they begin to plateau, aren't able to continue to scale and grow because they don't have their integrator or their COO. And they become exhausted and frustrated because then they can't do either role. Next slide, please. So a good integrator or COO, part of their role in the company is to remove the obstacles that are within the organization and hold everybody accountable. And so this frees the visionary to create the vision. And typically, visionaries are not very comfortable with holding people accountable. And not really good at removing obstacles. Next slide, please. So if you are in a company or running a company that is struggling with that kind of situation, sometimes you may be lucky enough to find an integrator within your company. More typically, you have to hire from outside. And next slide, please. When you're looking for an integrator, whether it's within your company or outside, a tool that I like to use is the Crystallizer quiz. You can find it at rocketfuelnow.com. And it's a test that will tell you if a person is either a visionary or an integrator. And most people are neither one. But it can help you identify potentially that person within your company who might have the natural talent and ability to be an integrator. You need to score, an individual needs to score 80 or above on either one of those tests to really be in that category. If you're hiring from outside, you want to look for a strong integrator COO with the background experience of having been in that role. And that's going to cost a lot more. It's usually 200, 300,000 a year, something like that. And so in parentheses, I have or not. There's people who have the natural skills and abilities. They've just never done it before. And so sometimes it's an opportunity, and I've seen that be very successful for people who don't have the previous experience, and you can get them at a lot less money, but they're going to need a lot of hand-holding and help along the way because they don't have the experience. The personality compatibility is an interesting thing there. Obviously, you want somebody who has, as Jason talked about, your same vision, passion, a lot of those things. But why I put to a point you want compatibility is there's always going to be tension in that relationship. And you can read Rocket Fuel, the book, it describes it really well. Visionaries have a hard time hiring somebody to be their second, number two guy or woman because they tend to want to hire somebody that's just like them and somebody they want to hang out with and that's fun, but to be with. But this COO type personality is more somebody that is going to be very different from the visionary. And so sometimes there's tension in that relationship, but that's a good thing. That's a healthy thing. One other thing that I think is really important to know, that the COO integrator does not need to have experience in your particular field. What a good integrator does, as I mentioned previously, is remove obstacles and hold people accountable. And those things can be done, I don't care what the company is. And I have background experience in owning and running everything from a manufacturing company to a healthcare services company. I mean, it kind of doesn't matter what the field is, you do the same stuff as an integrator. And then lastly, you can choose potentially a fractional person if you can't yet afford an expensive full-time integrator or COO. If your company is really following the system, it's possible that a fractional integrator could get your job done and you wouldn't have to have a full-time. And we have a number of people that will work fractionally for companies. Next slide, please. And then some companies discover that they already have a potential integrator working within their company. And this is where they may need, this new integrator needs coaching and support to fill the integrator role. So my focus is search and placement of integrators, COOs, whatever you call that number two person, and also helping with coaching them to be successful if they're new and don't have the experience. And I think there may be one more slide, or that may be it. Next slide. Okay, I think we're handing off to Jay.
Awesome. Thanks, Lamar. Thanks, Jason. First of all, I'm Jay Tankersley. I'm based in Denver, Colorado here today. And as Lamar just talked about the crystallizer quiz, I am a flaming visionary. I scored over a 90 on the crystallizer quiz. And so that really resonates with me, and the benefit of an integrator or COO or president is something I have realized painfully over the course of my career. I'm the chief investment officer of a growth equity fund called TF Investors. And we invest solely in companies that are EBITDA positive companies that are professionally implementing the Entrepreneurial Operating System, one operating system. Just a quick kind of background on how I got here. I started my career in the venture capital space and realized that I really was on the wrong side of the table. So I joined one of our portfolio companies on the leadership team, and in the span of about 36 months, helped drive that company to exit to a strategic acquirer of over 9 figures. And then decided I wanted to try my own hand at running that. So put together a syndicate, bought a business, ran that business, and through that was really exposed to the operating system, because when we bought the business, we were running it our own way, not intentional about our operating system, and brought in a coach to help us guide us through an operating system, and was able to successfully exit that. And the coach that we brought in happened to be a EOS implementer. And when we exited that business, I realized that being and helping communicate the effectiveness of operating systems to other businesses was something I really wanted to do and I was passionate about. And so I became a certified EOS implementer. And an interesting thing happened when I did that. A bunch of people in that community found out that I had investment background, and they said, hey, listen, I have a client or two that is looking to sell, looking to raise money, looking to transition to their family. Can you give me 2 or 3 bullet points? And my answer was always the same. I'm happy to help, but it's probably more than 2 or 3 bullet points. And so kind of 2 worlds kind of combined. And in late 2019, we put together the first and currently only professionally managed pool of capital that is intentionally investing in companies running on an operating system. So what I would like to do with the next couple of minutes, or 5-ish minutes, is spend a little bit of time, and I have 3 objectives. Is I want everyone to understand the 7 key entrepreneurial risks and the importance of mitigating them. And this is all going to tie into a lot of the stuff that Jason and Lamar just talked about. Then I want everyone to, all of us, especially from the investment world, there is this really strong staple in that community called the 100-day plan. And understanding that that concept, although effective, is actually not entirely true, and want us to understand why and what we need to do as entrepreneurs. And then lastly, can clarify why investors like me and entrepreneurs like you love operating systems, even if you don't know it. And so that's kind of really what I want to kind of get through. Next slide, please. So as I talked about, there are 7 critical entrepreneurial risks. And as an investor, before finding any operating system, we believe that there were 6. And so I want to walk through the first 6 and then talk a little bit of the second. First risk that any organization, whether it's a startup, growth stage, or it has been around for 20 years, is that there is a market risk associated. Are you in a market, playing in a market that is large and growing, small and shrinking, or somewhere in between? And what are the competitive kind of forces forcing on that market? And we have to understand how we can appropriately define and mitigate any risks around the market that we're playing in. Next, please. Second risk is a product risk. Whether or not we like it, any businesses that starts has a product risk. Is this a new product? Is it an add-on product? Is it a bolt-on? What does it make? What does it do? But we have to understand what is a product risk. More often than not, we've found investors are willing to take both product and market risk. And if you take both of those risks, bad things are about to happen. So we've got to understand where we are in the product. Do we have customers? What does the sales cycle look like from the product standpoint? Next one, management. Any company, there is a management risk that we have to understand. Is this a first-time entrepreneur that is trying to crack into this, or is it a seasoned team that has done this 3 or 4 times? What does that look like? And what are the mitigation strategies to be able to understand how to make sure that that does not capsize the business? Fourth one, the business model. Business model is very simple. Within the business model, do your revenues exceed your expenses? We need to want to invest in business models that work. When revenues don't exceed expenses, guys, that's going to be a long path forward. And so we have to have a business where that works, or there's a line of sight to be able to get there. Fifth one, regulatory. Regulatory is harder to understand because a lot of people say they don't operate in a regulated business. But what we mean by this is whether or not sweeping governmental or regulatory change can impact what you provide to your customers. This is not EEOC or kind of OSHA kind of risk, but can sweeping regulatory change really dramatically impact your business model or your business? And if so, appropriately understand that and what would be a pivot point or be able to do that. Next one, capital. Every business needs capital, whether it's bootstrapped or they brought outside investors in or whatnot. But however much we have, money we have or cash we have on the balance sheet is going to get us to a certain stage. And so what is the capital risk of us being able to understand that? So I'm going to pause there because when we were, at any investment firm that I've been at, we would do a lot of due diligence to understand and appropriately mitigate that risk. What we didn't understand, we didn't define, was a seventh risk. Go ahead. Which was the execution risk. If you want to click the slide, is the execution risk. Execution risk is a risk that most entrepreneurs and most investors are willing to take. However, when we run an operating system like Pinnacle, like EOS, like scaling up, like all of the things that Jason talked about, we are mitigating that execution risk. And this is really the premise that got us really excited about understanding this and creating this pool of capital to invest in companies that are professionally running on an operating system. So I think that's kind of the blanket statement. If you click the next slide, we've actually taken this a step further. And I know you can't read this. And if you would like to, we'll have our contact information at the end. I'm happy to send this. But we have made our investment focus now based on the company's ability to mitigate these 7 risks. And what you can see is the first risk that we want to mitigate is the execution risk, the operating system. Are you professionally using a coach or using a facilitator to implement that? And then here are things that you're able to score yourself or score a business that you're looking at or involved in to understand how we're doing. Our way we use this tool is if we are looking at a business, there is fundamentally no interest for us to be able to take the next step in terms of due diligence unless the company scores at least an average of 8 on these 7 risks. And so if it comes back at a 32, the company's not ready for us to take a look at or for outside capital. And so again, I'm happy to share this with you to be able to do that. Next slide, please. So the second thing I want to cover is this whole idea of a 100-day plan. When we start a business, when we move into anything, when we invest in a business, when we make that, a 100-day plan is typically do that. Even when our president takes the office, here's my 100-day plan. What we have done, most investors, they have it flawed because what happens at the end of 100 days when you don't continue that plan is we've got, oh, great, we've got 100 days. Well, now we're just going to flounder and go back to old habits and whatnot. And so, as I said, a 100-day plan is one of the most entrenched ideas with private investors. Most 100-day plans, even if they're executed really effectively in the long term, fail because there is no follow on that. And so as an entrepreneur or as entrepreneurs or investors, it's really important that after we establish that first 100-day plan, ask yourselves, what do I need to do in the next 90 days to make progress on the momentum that I've already gained? And then after that, and then 90 days, and then 90 days, 90 days, but continue that discipline of 100 days for the rest of your kind of in perpetuity, if you will. This is the real key to being able to operationalize your strategy. And this is why operating systems work so well. It's the key to moving from a scrappy, bootstrapped company to a highly efficient and scalable organization. These operating systems really revisit and revise the whole concept around a 100-day plan, because it's not how we start, it's how we continue the journey and run the marathon and finish the race. Next slide, please. Sorry. Then the last thing I just wanted to conclude on this is I think that the best definition of an operating system is the following. An operating system is the way a company organizes all of its human energy. It's the way people in the organization meet, solve problems, plan, prioritize, follow process, communicate, measure, structure, clarify roles, lead, and manage. Again, this is exactly what Jason and Lamar talked about, but this definition, this is why an operating system is critically important and why we need to continue to think about and become very intentional about the operating systems that we run. And so, next slide, please. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, and thank you guys for the time for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Jay, good conclusion. And I actually, to kick off Q&A, I'm going to point this one to Jason, but I want to make this a dialogue. So if anyone has points to add on to, please feel free to. Again, for Jason, but Jay, you were kind of showing the scorecard and a 100-day plan, and I know we've used 90-day plans and similar looking scorecards. So the question is, are there a lot of differences in business operating systems, and what are they? Yeah,
so as I mentioned, I mentioned a few, and I think Jay did as well. Rockefeller Habits, Scaling Up, Stratop, obviously EOS is a very widely used and followed operating system. Pinnacle is another. There are more similarities than differences between them, and primarily because they draw from the same source code. They basically all have, I won't say stolen, because they are very open about it. They borrow from the greats, right? And so if you look back at Jim Collins, and if you really look at the past about 100 years of great business writing and methodologies and wisdom, they all draw from those. But if you were to read Rockefeller Habits and Traction, for instance, you're going to see a lot of the same language. And so, which is good news, because someone hasn't come up with something so radical that it is vastly different from the others. The key is finding an operating system that fits your model, that you feel confident that you can follow, and that you've got, in my opinion, I think a coach or facilitator or a guide to help you through that process. It's really, really critical. But I'd say they're all valid. Gino was a master at simplifying and developing a prescriptive approach to implementing an operating system. But they're all very, very good methodologies. But again, the differences are going to be some nuances. Some have more focus on strategy, and some are more focused on operations and execution. Scaling Up, for instance, has a lot of measurables and KPIs around the finance side of it. And so they just go deeper than EOS, for instance. But so again, no bad choice there. It's really about finding the model that fits you the best. But I'll back up to what Jay said. Find an operating system, follow it, right? Because that's really what's going to get you to the next level, being intentional about implementing these best practices.
Well, and I want to make the comment that it's important to pick one and stick with it. Similarities doesn't mean you can just kind of do a.
They're not interchangeable. Yeah, I agree.
Pick one, stick with it.
That's right. Yeah, I agree with everything everyone said. I think, everyone should do their own research and find one that works, whether it's peer groups, things like Vistage, EO, or whatnot. Talk to your network, understand what they've done, what they've discovered, what resonates with them. Do your research and pick one. The interesting thing about operating systems is, and I think what the three of us are talking about, is we really like businesses that are intentional about the operating system that they run. Whether you like it or not, every business has an operating system, And it's just those businesses that tend to be intentional about choosing an operating system tend to achieve much greater results and have much higher engagement than those that just let the operating system bubble from the ground up. Because every company has a certain way that they communicate, certain way that they prioritize, certain way that they plan. It's just those that are intentional about choosing an operating system do it a lot more effectively and a lot more efficiently than those that let it, kind of organically blossom.
It'd be a lot
Jay,
of work to
quick
develop
question
your
for
own,
you.
to be honest. So yeah,
Almost, can you develop your own? Can you implement it yourself? And we'll come back to that. But while I have it top of mind, Jay, looking through the scorecard, talking about it bubbling up and prioritizing, do you put more weight on a certain aspect of the business operating system? Does that happen naturally? Do you kind of force it, or do you need to really let it be equally distributed across each area of the operating system so that, you're not biasly focusing on one area of the business and neglecting others?
Yeah, I think all of these, and I'd love to hear from Jason and Lamar on this too. All of these operating systems are most effective when the entire organization embodies and perpetuates and follows and buys into this operating system. I have seen a lot of times where it's like the leadership team is running on an operating system, but the rest of the organization has no clue what they're talking about. And that's a real problem. And so, the journey to get there, different departments are going to adopt different tools and different aspects at different rates. But the end goal is that we want the entire organization, top to bottom, to be able to speak the same language, have the same vision, kind of stand shoulder to shoulder as they're going into battle. And so that's the real important thing, is you can't do that. The last thing I'll say on this is the elements of the operating system that tend to have the most significant impact and be the hardest are anything around strategic planning and defining the strategy, and people, because those are the two hardest things that we have to manage in any business. The other stuff helps support that, but usually the hardest parts are really getting the people element right, as Lamar talked about, visionary and integrator and everything top to bottom, and then the strategy to truly differentiate our organization from anybody else. That's what I get that. But really the benefit of an operating system is once the whole organization is running on it, that's when the real magic happens.
Yeah, it is. That's absolutely right. Those that had the most success are those that have taken it seriously and they integrate it throughout the whole organization, as Jay said. And that's a big part of, I know, what Lamar does when she engages with clients. It's a huge thing, right? If it's just something that is a temporary, something you're excited about and want to try out, it will fail. A lot of my clients are part of Vistage, and their leadership teams always joke about they get the Vistage flu when they come back they're excited about some idea, but they get over it and they go back to being where they were before. This can't be something that you're just going to get over eventually. It really is, and I will say it's not for the faint of heart either. It really is a hard look at your business, where we are seriously looking at what you do well, what you don't do well, and putting a structure around that. And so you'll do more harm than good if you just try it out. This isn't something you want to do lighthearted. You want to really implement it, and it has to be driven all the way through the organization.
Well, if I'm understanding Andrew's question properly, an operating system automatically, if you're running disciplined on an operating system, it's going to spread everything out evenly. There won't be strong
there's no area.
One place, weak focus elsewhere. And if you have a very good integrator, they will make sure that everything is balanced and properly covered as well.
Yeah,
that's right.
And that was kind of the second part to this question is, not trying to force it in the direction that you want it to go, but letting it take its natural course and identify these issues by way of process. And that the question was, can you implement it yourself? Or do you really need an integrator? And it sounds like the latter.
A visionary cannot implement it themselves. I can tell you that. If they have a good integrator, a really good integrator, experienced COO, you can possibly do it. most companies I've seen who've implemented themselves are kind of sloppy and aren't well disciplined. That's my experience, but Jason and Jay may have other thoughts.
I agree that there are clients I work with that have implemented for years themselves. We come in and we go back through the whole process again, and it's so much stronger after that, right? So having a third party, an outside person, really hold you accountable to the process and give perspective. Sometimes it's hard for the leadership team to push back on the visionary. You know, what happens is the model becomes what's in your head, not what the collective intelligence of the team sees as a direction. And so a third party can give you more balance there. And it's not too different also than any kind of diet regime or an exercise regime. If you've got a coach, someone that's holding you accountable, the odds of success are much, much higher versus trying to do it on your own. You'll typically, it's just human nature. We tend to kind of get light on ourselves, and eventually it fades and we don't do it anymore. So having somebody driving it is important.
Yep. So again, I agree with everything that they said. Flaming visionary here. And in my business, I tried to self-implement EOS unsuccessfully for 18 months and failed before getting smart and hiring an implementer. We got more done in the next 6 months than we had in the previous 18.
Yeah.
And the analogy I like to use on that is kind of like cutting my 10-year-old loose at a buffet. He's going to go get all the pizza, the French fries, the dessert, but he's not going to have any broccoli or spinach on his plate when he comes back. And that's the stuff that really helps him grow and become the person that that he needs to become. And so most self-implementers tend to say, "Ooh, that looks fun. I'm going to do that. That looks hard. I'm going to avoid that." And these operating systems are most effective when they are implemented holistically as a complete process, not piecemealed and put together.
Right.
So then I guess this is for Lamar. Obviously we're going to need the visionaries, need the integrators. What's the biggest mistake a visionary makes when trying to hire an integrator? How do they go about doing that?
Well, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. They have a tendency to want to hire another visionary just like themselves. Because it's really fun to sit around and kick around ideas and think up cool stuff. And we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And there's the discomfort is as the visionary is coming up with really amazing ideas. You have somebody else in the room saying, okay, that's a great idea, but how would that work? And try to think through the mechanics of it. And I don't know that others may have comments on that as well.
Jason, go ahead if you got any.
Yeah, I think, the reality is a strong implementer can't be understated. The need for someone to come in and run their operations and accountability. I'll tell you that more often than not, the entrepreneur will tell me that I'm terrible at holding people accountable, or I don't want to hold people accountable. That's very common. I was a visionary in my company. I didn't like it either. But I had a strong implementer, and he was great at holding people accountable. He was driving the vision, driving the P&L, driving accountability throughout the organization. The execution of our playbook was really important, that you've got somebody who is capable of doing that. And what I find is that many companies, their leadership team, typically they weren't hired on early on as a leader in the business. They were hired on as a great resource to the business and proved themselves and elevated up eventually into that leadership role. And so not that there's not a capable leadership there, but a lot of them are oftentimes inexperienced at leadership and management. And so finding that proper, the integrator in the business can be challenging sometimes, someone who's in a position to do that and is capable of doing it. I find oftentimes an outside person is more effective, but it's tough to find.
Yeah.
Another mistake that visionaries make is they maybe have gotten to that point where they're in so much pain, they're so frustrated, they're so this has got to end, I can't stand it anymore, because they're doing both roles. But what's so important is to be willing to let go and let that COO, integrator, let them do their job. And it is uncomfortable when the integrator is holding people accountable and they come and complain to the visionary and say, so-and-so is making me unhappy in my job. And the visionary's got to back the integrator up. You will get past that. And it's sort of like in a classroom when there's chaos, kids are having fun, but it's really, they don't have a lot of security, or you can use it in parenting. But when there's discipline in place, everybody knows what they're supposed to do, everybody can perform better, and it truly makes people happier, even though they complain at first.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that again. That is something I often see, is that kind of mom and dad dynamic, right? If I don't like the answer from one, I'll go to the other, and you've got to be real careful about not allowing that to happen. You've got to get through that, as Lamar said, where eventually they'll get it, but for a while it's a little tough.
Yeah, and I think just, to echo that, I think the two, Andrew, you asked kind of what are some of the pitfalls or some of the mistakes, or how to make sure to do that. I think one of the biggest missteps I see between visionaries trying to hire an integrator, or if they do hire an integrator, is this has to be someone that the visionary trusts implicitly. Because if they don't trust that integrator implicitly, they are never going to let go of the things and free up the integrator to be successful. And so without that trust, without that partnership, it's dead on arrival. I think the other thing that I'll add is as an investor, we have lost more money with visionaries pretending to be integrators because the title of CEO told them they had to run the day-to-day operations of the business.
Right.
And so if given the option, and I think others on the panel would agree with me, to invest in a company that had a world-class integrator or a world-class visionary, I'm going to take a world-class integrator 10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be able to execute and operationalize all the things that we just talked about, and that's really important. Now, as Lamar mentioned, it becomes rocket fuel when you've got a great dynamic of a visionary and an integrator, but the importance of the integrator cannot be understated, and it's just really important to have that dynamic and have that trust. And also, as a founder, as a CEO, give yourself the freedom that the reason you started this business might not have been to run the day-to-day operations, and that's okay. And so give yourself permission to let that go, because your organization will really succeed at that point.
And
the point of this whole group, Exit Advisors, is creating value for your company. So, and that may be, Jason, what you were going to say, but basically, if you are integral to this company moving forward and you have an amazing integrator who is, that's something that can be sold. That's something that an investor would say, you have a great system here, you have somebody running it, and here's your money, goodbye.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to suggest, is that if you are a critical piece of the machine, then that machine doesn't have as much value if you want to leave after selling. And so that number two, if you think of the integrator as your number two, the person that's going to stay and run the machine while after you're gone, that's ultimately critical for value of the company going forward. So don't hold back in enabling them. Obviously, when the time is right, but your job should be enable them to take on that role once you get the right person.
Yeah, I wanted to interject, but you guys all hit the points so perfectly. There's really nothing else I can say other than, from our perspective, the number one risk down the list of risks that we try to eliminate is owner intervention, owner involvement. You want this to be a machine that someone can take and plug in from a buyer's perspective. And if you remove the owner and the company falls apart, there's no value. And from an investment perspective, it adds so much value to the business. It pays for itself. It alleviates the day-to-day and working in the business. As an owner, you get freedoms, you get financial freedom and operational freedom. We've had some owners that can't leave for a few days, and we're working on their company. And then we've also had owners and clients that go on vacation in Italy and go biking through the countryside for 2 weeks and come back and their business is perfect. So you want to definitely be the latter.
Andrew, I noticed that Gary had his hand up, and then have we addressed how long does it take to implement an operating system?
Yeah, because Gary uses it at his CPA firm. We use it at Exit Advisors. We have clients that use it, but
Can I say something, Andrew? I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sitting here. I couldn't get a word in. You guys are going so fast, ricocheting back and forth. I've been waiting to say something, but I use Lamar to help me try to identify the various roles in my office, and then she basically found Jason for me. And I can tell you, I read the book Traction. I outlined the book Traction. I'm a visionary, and it was a crash landing when I tried to do it myself. And having Jason come in, just from my experience, it's allowed me to put accountability in place for the people in the right seats in my business. To have an integrator, it's basically taken me out of the woods, allowing me to have a lot more clarity and be able to do the things that I do best, and that's build a business. And it's also allowed me to have more time with Exit Advisors, to help grow that business as well. So I truly believe in EOS. I believe in a strong operating system. I've seen some incredible changes. Our revenues in the CPA practice are up 35% this year. And, during COVID, we were fine. We continued to have our level 10 meetings each week. We kept everybody, transparent and on board. And so I highly recommend anybody who's got a business implement this program and make it work. Don't slide. Don't think that you can put your own processes in place and that you have a better way. Follow the playbook, and I think it'll work well.
Well tested.
Thank you, Gary. To clarify, I came in as a consultant with Gary's company to sort of help him figure out what he should do and who could maybe be his integrator within his company. It would be his full-time person within the company. And then Jason came in as an EOS implementer or coach to help implement that into the company. And that's usually a quarterly annual meeting to just keep everybody on track. So
Exactly. Good.
well,
Thank you.
how long does it take to implement an operating system? We have that question up.
Yeah, the time and cost of implementation.
So I'll chime in. You guys can add to it, but the first answer is you're never done, and because you're running on the operating system, as long as you've got a business, essentially, that's the way it should be. To get it implemented into your environment, it typically takes about 6 months to get the kind of the basis done, the foundation built, and start really living in it. And then really the first year, I'd say you're still learning a lot. But by year 2, typically businesses are fully on EOS, they should be, or on the operating system that you've decided to deploy. About a year is about as long as you should need to spend getting it implemented, and then you're running on it going forward. Now, the accountability is still critical. So the implementers and coaches that are out there, I highly recommend that you still engage with them, because having somebody on a quarterly basis, again, this goes back to a diet regime or workout regime, having somebody that's coming in and calling you out, holding you accountable for what you said was going to happen, and measuring your progress towards that ultimate goal is really, really important. It has huge impact versus trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, I agree with 100% of everything Jason said. I think the only thing that I would add to that is two things that I add to that is, echo his sentiment that it's never over. Within our business, in our firm, we've been implementing EOS for 5 years, and we're still getting better every quarter. And so it's a perpetual journey that is never over. However, I think if you're about to embark or start the journey of implementing an EOS, you should mentally commit to 2 years of some frustration, some changes, some implementation until you start to see the benefit. And so I think just mentally be prepared for 2 years of an implementation before it really starts to feel like it's 100% top to bottom in the organization, grabbed hold, has grabbed hold, and you're starting to execute, and people is starting to see the benefit of it. I just think, if you think it's a seminar and it's going to be a weekend and a retreat to be able to do that, and it's going to fix all of your woes, that you're setting yourself up for huge disappointment.
But I will say that repetition you'll have form these habits. Eventually it'll feel weird not to do these things. We talk a lot about our culture behaviors within building the culture in your environment is part of that. And some of that is the repetition, the rituals of doing what you do. To use a Greg Cleary analogy, nobody woke up on Monday morning and said, "This is the week I'm going to do it every day this week. I'm going to brush my teeth." Right? It would feel weird not to do it. Right? You have a habit that's baked into who you are, that it was created because of doing it over and over and over again. And so as you get into these operating systems, you'll start forming these habits. You'll get to where you really trust and depend on some of the techniques that are used, the structure of the meetings and the way you measure things, the way you build out accountability. These will just be a part of your business eventually. But it does take time. To Jay's point, it does take a year, 2 years. I think you're probably right, 2 years before it becomes natural. A year to get the basis kind of baked in, though, for sure.
Yep.
Well, and I just see that it goes faster with companies that are fully committed to doing it and making it happen, and they have help. It'll go faster.
Well, folks, I can't thank you enough for your time and your expertise today. We're a little bit over, so I apologize if we've held you up, but thank you so much, Jason, Jay, and Lamar, for all of your insights and for sharing your knowledge with us.
You bet.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate everyone for joining.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.